Hello, and welcome to Based on Facts, where fiction and superstition meet logic and scientific facts on WLT 95.7 FM, broadcasting from the Allen County Public Library. My name is Chris Rex, and on this week's show we're going to be talking about Wikileaking Clinton. In other words, talking about WikiLeaks and Hillary Clinton. It's kind of been a hot topic in news lately, so figure we can go ahead and delve into it a little bit. First, we kind of have to talk about WikiLeaks itself a little bit. Okay. Now, when you go to their website and look at a few of the different characteristics on their About section, you start getting a pretty good idea of what they are, what they're about, and kind of some of the things that they're doing or trying to accomplish in the world. So, if you really want to look at what works as a definition for what is like WikiLeaks, you will see that it really comes down to this one sentence. All right, that they're a not-for-profit media organization whose goal is to bring important news and information to the public by providing an innovative, secure, and anonymous way for sources to leak information to their journalists via an electronic Dropbox. That kind of wraps them up. The reason why it's so important to have an organization like this is because of that last little tidbit, that anonymous part, right? And what that allows them to do is have certain advantages over certain other news outlets that aren't necessarily quite so good at protecting the anonymity of their sources. Let me continue a little bit here, just kind of defining what WikiLeaks is. They also publish original source material alongside their news stories so that readers and historians alike can see evidence of the truth and analyze them independently and reach their own conclusions, basically. So that's kind of nice because it's not often that you see in news articles and such that the source evidence, that the raw data is presented along with the journalist's interpretation of the data. And that's nice, that's awesome, that's very important. And that's what they're trying to accomplish here with WikiLeaks. Now, as far as how they're able to operate as an organization, they really pretty much rely on one particular clause in Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All right, if we want to talk about what this UDHR is, it's kind of something that was a result of World War II and some of the horrific things that happened, violations of human rights that happened during that war, some horrific things done on both sides of the fence, so to speak. Obviously, the worst were committed by the Germans, but you know what? A number of other entities in that war also committed great atrocities against human rights, including us. So nobody was innocent, so to speak, and from that war we learned that we really should establish some sort of rules or guidelines to govern what sorts of rights humans should have just inherently, from birth, basically. Now, of course, that's a contention that kind of ties into a previous episode tying into abortion, whether we're talking about from birth or from conception, but we're not going to discuss that here. What is interesting about this Universal Declaration of Human Rights is that it came about in 1948, right, and it was something that was put together by the United Nations, right, which U.S. is a part of course. And in that, they laid out 30 different articles that describe various rights that every human being should be privy to. Okay. And that these are sorts of things that we're trying to give people rights and privileges to regardless of the situation. Okay. Now, this was only really a list of guidelines, so to speak, for a few decades here. Eventually became part of a larger set of rules, which we call the International Bill of Human Rights, which ended up including not only this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but it also went on to include the International Covenants on Economic, Social, Cultural, Civil, and Political Rights. And that huge Bill of Human Rights, that thing actually did become international law in 1976. So really, every point up until then, human rights was just kind of a set of guidelines. It wasn't until 1976 that it actually became law on an international level, that everybody seemed to sit down and agree, hey, we have this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we have these covenants on different rights. We feel like these are pretty important things. And so we're going to make them into the Bill of Human Rights and enforce it. And so that's where we're at today. We have this bill, it's being enforced, it's being suggested, being the suggested human rights that everyone should be subjected to. Okay. Now, Article 19 in particular is kind of the one that Wikileaks relies on. And if we go and look at what that says, that states that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes the freedom to hold opinions without interference, and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. Okay? So it's really just being able to talk, essentially. Whether you want to say something that's your personal opinion against some other person, hey, your burgers suck. Okay, you can say that without getting shot. Now, obviously, that starts getting a little more delicate, so to speak, when we're talking about more direct lines of communication that can be perceived as threats. Threats don't necessarily fall under that protection. Okay, but just giving a comment, a commentary, an opinion on a subject, that's really protected by this law. Okay. Now, additionally, some of the other things that WikiLeaks does is they accept anonymous sources of information. Okay. Now, I kind of alluded to that before, how powerful that is, but I really didn't emphasize how important that was, because through the almost 10 years that WikiLeaks has been operating, they've not had a single source be revealed. Okay, so they really have maintained anonymous sources for 9 years of operation, which is pretty incredible. Pretty incredible. They only started up in 2007, so that's pretty awesome. And they were able to do that because they have this high security anonymous Dropbox. It's fortified by cutting edge cryptographic information technologies in order to provide that maximum protection for their sources. That way somebody can just randomly come across some information, highly sensitive at a high governmental level, submit it, and there's no way to track it back to them. Because in order to do that, the person wanting to track down that person within WikiLeaks would have to try and coordinate efforts from many different branches of WikiLeaks, because the information is so fragmented. It comes from and is parsed out to so many different sources that you'd have to expend a lot of time and effort in order to try to re-piece together that information and try to ascertain where that information came from. Now, obviously, via email or this anonymous Dropbox is not ideal for everyone. There are certainly people who want to sit here and deliver information in person, so to speak, with physical documents. In those cases, they once again try to undergo measures that protect the anonymous identity of that provider of information. And that's cool. That's awesome, actually. So, whether they say, hey, I'm going to drop off this letter behind the mailbox at this address, and you can come and pick it up. That's cool. Awesome. Now, obviously, kind of behooves the person who's providing the information to safeguard their own tracks, right? So if they're in a high-level governmental position or a sensitive position of any kind that is being monitored, whether we're talking about their phone records, their email records, their house, whether it's bugged or not, they have to keep that in mind for themselves. Okay, that's not on WikiLeaks. So making sure that you are not being monitored and followed to the drop-off point to make this rendezvous, it's really on you. Okay, some serious Jason Bourne type stuff going on here. Kind of neat if you really want to look into it like that. But going back to what WikiLeaks does, yes, they accept this anonymous information without soliciting for it, more often than not. Now, every now and then they will post a reward or a bounty of sorts for certain bits of information that they realize is particularly sensitive or relevant. So they're like, hey, this information is in high demand. You know what? We'll pay for this information. If you have it, provide it. Boom. And you get money that way. For the most part, though, it's a very passive mechanism. Whatever people submit is what gets submitted. And then it goes through some sort of analysis process. So when they get information in, they analyze the material, try to verify it, and then they try to digest the material and regurgitate it in a way that makes sense to you. Because not all material that they take in is necessarily very conducive to being interpreted. Okay, kind of requires some context, might require some more knowledge and information otherwise. And that's why we hope that the journalists that are writing the article are well informed, do keep the context in mind, and can take this bit of raw data, whether it be an email or a personal record or something, that they can take that and distill it down to a manner that's understandable by us, easily understandable by us. But they'll go on and do this process to try to verify that information, write a news piece on it, to try to describe how it's significant to you. Because that's obviously kind of what they're there for, right? Is to tell you what's going on and how this particular bit of information might be relevant to your life. That's certainly the case. Now, once again, once they come to publishing that particular article, they'll not only publish their interpretation of it, of the information, but they'll also post the raw data along with that article. So they'll provide links, little hyperlinks in the news article itself. That way you can link to the original information that they themselves actually saw and integrated into their particular article. Now, the reason why it's called WikiLeaks is not necessarily because it has anything to do with Wikipedia. And that took me a while to find out when I was first looking into this stuff a little while ago. WikiLeaks has nothing to do with Wikipedia. The only real similarity between the two is in kind of how they set up their web pages, to where WikiLeaks tries to keep it very readable, very simple. They try to make sure that you can link out to the various raw documents and the references. And that's really great. That's really powerful. I really appreciate that. But yeah, WikiLeaks is literally just saying wiki for the sake of being like, well, we're kind of like a wiki, but you guys can't edit anything. It's only our journalists and such that edit the articles. But we're really just saying, well, we're as easy to read and get along with and understand as Wikipedia. That's really kind of the angle that you're taking on that particular thing. Now, they also do implement some sort of not necessarily censorship, okay? They don't explicitly censor the stuff that they get in, but if they get a particular document, and this particular document gives the names, date of births, and addresses of operatives working in Iraq as undercover agents, then yes, if they are looking to publish that right now, while that operation is probably still in effect, they will most likely block out the names and the sensitive bits of information there. And that's not necessarily censorship for the sake of censorship. It's more censorship in a way that protects lives. Okay, so if somebody's life is at stake, they will certainly take measures to minimize that potential harm in the process. So they call this a harm minimization procedure, all right, where they may take a little while to process a bit of data and put it out there, just because they're going through the data and removing sensitive bits of information that may result in the death or severe injury of various persons. Another important thing is kind of understanding why WikiLeaks does what it does. More often than not, you'll see this kind of maybe high and mighty kind of road being taken, being like, hey, we are, just out here to make sure that everything is as transparent as possible, making sure that everybody has access to this bit of information because it's kind of their right to do so. But you really kind of have to delve into that a little deeper. Okay? And when you really start looking at it, you see that they kind of come from this particular angle that publishing such raw data improves transparency. And transparency leads to a better society, so to speak, for everyone on the planet. I don't necessarily share this sentiment. Right? I don't. The older I get, the more I see stupid people ruining it for everyone. I hate to say it that way, but honestly, people are just ridiculous when it comes to stuff. And if it comes to something that they really don't know much about, they're even more ridiculous than usual. So sitting here and trying to say that transparency is helpful, well, that really only works if the people that you're being transparent with are knowledgeable, informed, reasonable, and logical people. The masses are not that. Not that at all. I'm sorry. When I have to sit here and spend umpteen hours just looking up and trying to understand what WikiLeaks is, it's hard for me to understand, even after that period of time, exactly every implication behind WikiLeaks. It's difficult for me. So when trying to think about how people who have not even remotely researched these topics for longer than 5 minutes via Google, it's difficult to justify that it's okay to give them information when they really don't have the depth or level of context that somebody who's actually informed actually does. And that was my problem with labeling GMOs. That was one of the things with Bernie Sanders' campaign. He's been doing that in Vermont, making a mandatory labeling for GMOs. And as much as I am pro-transparency, I am very against the labeling of GMOs. Because if you look at it, if you look at the actual raw data, you see that sales of organic foods are now surpassing sales and incomes from GMO companies, like Monsanto. So Whole Foods is raking in more money based on its organic campaigns than Monsanto is on its GMO campaign. Organic is big business. GMOs are suffering. Even though the truth of the matter is, GMOs are the future. They are the way to go. And yet, because of all this public fear and outrage that's really just based on ignorance. It's just spiraling out of control. These people who started this propaganda campaign against GMOs, these people are profiting by the billions of dollars, far above and beyond anything that Monsanto has ever done. So think about it for 1 minute as far as who the real enemy here is. Is it GMOs? Or is it Whole Foods? Because Whole Foods and every other organic supplier is banking off the same level of ignorance that produced this whole anti-GMO movement. Because if you look at the data, you start finding out, hey, GMOs are actually not all that bad. In fact, they're awesome. They're excellent. There's not really any negatives going on there. Any substantial negatives. All substantial negatives are on the side of the organic foods. But the organic industry doesn't want you to know that. And you can find out all that stuff yourself. It's just all these industries are preying upon your ignorance. And that kills me. That kills me. Because it's gotten so bad that we cannot be transparent about the labeling of GMO foods. Not to mention about 80% of all processed food is GMO anyway, or contains GMOs. But we can't go on and label things as containing GMOs because so many people have such a negative connotation associated with it. That's crazy to me. How is that even so? I love transparency. I love knowing as much as humanly possible. But when you get people in there that don't know anything, well, they just react instinctively or very basically or emotionally. And they think, oh, well, we're talking about mutants, genetic mutants, and making mutants left and right and causing cancer because clearly this is just genetic mutants. None of that has any basis in truth at all. We are we are basically undergoing directed evolution at the genetic scale to modify a product. That's all we're doing. That's all we're doing. It's a lot more efficient of a process than selective breeding, which says, hey, we have a shotgun of traits. We're going to breed for a sub-shotgun of traits and hope that we get some favorable results. And people recognize it in dog breeding. How awesome would it be to be able to breed a dog with specific characteristics that you set, as opposed to having to sit here and be like, well, you have this dog, it looks this particular way, but due to the massive inbreeding that it took to get to this state, it's only going to live about 5 years, and that's going to get such horrible hip dysplasia that you're going to have to put it down. Or that the genes are so messed up in the first place that he's going to get cancer by the time he's 3. And then you'll have to put him down. That's screwed up. If we just went in there and modified the genes directly, you wouldn't have to deal with any of those side effects. Any of them. But no, people have a negative opinion of it. And so I'm right there with Wikileaks. I wish we could make things as transparent as possible at all times, but it's just, when you're dealing with the ignorant masses, I admit, I'm even ignorant on a lot of topics, it's difficult to justify making certain things transparent. Because people don't think about the context. They don't sit there and learn about the context. You know, some people sit here and talk negative things about Hillary because they're like, well, she's openly said that she'll say one thing behind closed doors and another thing to your face. And it's like, well, isn't that what everyone does? Don't you do that? Don't you behave a certain way around your grandmother or around your parents and behave a completely different way around your friends? Don't you do that? Because unless you don't, which does happen, I don't see how you're griping about politics. Because politics is all about doing one thing in one context and another thing in another context. If you're, for Hillary's case, if you're Secretary of State and you are going all around the world, mingling with all these different diplomats, guess what? You're going to need to use a different approach for every person based on that individual context. And you know that. It's like being a salesman. You don't go, as a salesman, as a really good salesman, you don't go in there with the same pitch in the same way to every single client. You shape that pitch in an individualized way to fit that client's needs and wants and desires. You don't go in there with a single method. People with single method pitches, like what I would do if I was a salesman, which is why I'm not a very good salesman, they aren't successful. They undergo evolution and they die out. So you can't do that. There is no way that that becomes an effective method of getting sales. So when it comes to WikiLeaks, we have to see what the benefits are of providing some level of transparency. And the benefits of having some transparency, because all things should be done in moderation, including transparency, benefits of some level of transparency there produces better scrutiny, which I agree is a good thing. And theoretically, it should lead to reduced levels of corruption, at the governmental levels, at the political levels. And it should theoretically lead to stronger democracies. Things are actually founded on real beliefs, real systems, and systems that work, basically. And that would be awesome to see an increase in those types of things. But we also have to try to balance that, right? So there's a difference between trying to spot this level of corruption and have it go against or have it compared to this game of poker, so to speak, that politicians have to do. Okay, so corruption is one thing if you're getting paid off specifically to do something, but recognizing that being a politician is just a game of poker, that you have to play your hand as best you can. You have to kind of bluff in certain circumstances. You have to kind of put a different face forward in other circumstances. But that doesn't make you corrupt. It makes you good at your job. All right. As Trump has said, not paying taxes makes him a good businessman because he sees that loophole that he can utilize, monopolizing on the depreciation of his businesses, of which 2/3 of them have failed, by the way. But when you look at that, you start to think, well, that's not so bad. I can see where Hillary's coming from. The fact that she has to kind of do this dance back and forth with various peoples in various contexts all over the world. Trump has to play this game where he can take advantage of certain tax breaks to where he doesn't have to pay federal taxes. That's awesome. It's genius of him from a business perspective. Especially when, like I said, 2/3 of his businesses fail. And yet somehow he's still considered a great businessman. Figure that one out. So very interesting there. Just trying to look at the sorts of things that WikiLeaks is doing. Now, kind of going back and elaborating a little bit more on how WikiLeaks verifies its information, we can look and see that, once again, they kind of look at each news story as they get them in and try to scrutinize them as best they can. Now, that can include things like determining whether this story seems real, what elements within the story prove that it's real, and then even going so far as saying, well, who would want to fake this if indeed this was faked? And how much resources would they have to put into it in order to accomplish that goal? How much resources does it take to fake a letterhead or a signature? I don't know. I don't know. And who are the kinds of people that would benefit from this particular bit of information being put forth? And that's been the big question lately with all this different stuff being released by WikiLeaks against Hillary Clinton. Because you start to think, well, how much would Trump benefit from these things being released? And then that asks the question, well, is Trump somehow behind it? So that starts to ask those sorts of questions. Now, as far as the actual process that they use to go about this whole analysis of the information that they get, they use traditional investigative journalism, but they also use more modern technology-based methods. So, they'll obviously, if they get a physical document, they'll scan it in, they'll do a forensic analysis of the document, see exactly how legit it appears to be, try to figure out how much it would cost to forge that document, because that also ties into who stands to benefit from the whole situation. Try to ascertain the means that they would go about this, the motive behind doing this, what kinds of opportunities somebody would have to do this, but also try to match that up with the claims of the author themselves, the person that's putting these forth. Okay. But they also have some other things that go into this process as well. They can also send these documents off that they get for external verification. So maybe they end up sending a reporter to the Middle East to do some interviews, ascertain some hospital records maybe, something like that. They can do more hands-on, on-the-ground types of stuff. But even through all these verification measures, WikiLeaks is not flawless at all. And so they're probably going to make a mistake at some point. And some people have hinted that they have made mistakes. But as of this particular moment, they have not been found for sure to have committed any sorts of mistakes. As far as any of the information they've presented, nobody has refuted it. Okay. Which is kind of unusual. That's really surprising, actually. Many people, when they start to see some information that might be something that kind of condemns them, a lot of times the response is to just say, hey, that wasn't me. Oh, what you're talking about. That's not my record there. That's not my email. I don't know what you're talking about there. But you know what? WikiLeaks has apparently correctly identified the veracity of every document it has published in that 9-year time span. Which is really quite impressive. Really impressive. Now, when we go to see what comprises WikiLeaks, the types of people that work for WikiLeaks or volunteer for WikiLeaks, we see a team of probably about 100 different people from all over the world. All right, lots of independent different people, whether we're talking about journalists, software programmers, network engineers, mathematicians, all these different kinds of people that are working together to achieve this goal. So they all kind of have some sort of passion for finding information, finding the facts, ascertaining the truth behind all these different sorts of things that are going on in the world. And so, I don't know. I know it may seem a little optimistic or idealistic, but I feel like I could be a part of that. Trying to lay down the facts, trying to establish the facts, trying to find the facts. That's what I'm doing here. I'm based on facts. Now, as far as some of the awards that these guys have gotten, in their years of real operation from 2008 to 2014, they've gotten 17 different awards, which is pretty incredible. It's a lot of awards. It's more than 2 awards per year. They've gotten it for things like, simple things like journalism, integrity, free speech, courage, human rights, and they've even been called a hero of privacy, which I think is kind of interesting because part of the whole WikiLeaks thing is violating certain manners of privacy in order to get the information that they're desiring. But I think it's really from the standpoint that by getting certain bits of information, for example, when it came to identifying that the US government was spying on people in ways and in manners that weren't necessarily directly approved of or known by the American public, then yes, you would consider them a hero of privacy because they helped find out that the American people were being spied on and the people didn't know it. So that's kind of a violation of privacy. So yes, in that context, I can see them being heralded as a hero of privacy. Now, if we consider exactly what WikiLeaks has been releasing over time, we can see that they've released more authentic documents, more classified intelligence documents than the entire rest of the world press combined. So they've done a huge dent as far as impacting the rest of the world and providing raw data in order to truly analyze and interpret what's going on in the world around us. So pretty phenomenal that they have outdone everything else combined. Pretty phenomenal. And if we look at how successful they've been in defending themselves from attack, once again, they're trying to take the stance that Article 19 of the International Bill of Rights, Article 19 protects them. They've successfully been able to stand their ground relative to that, which is pretty surprising. So when it comes to them being sued by various organizations, including the US government, especially the intelligence agencies, we see that, yeah, they've never once been condemned in a court system for any of the potential lawsuits against them. They've been victorious every time. Pretty awesome. Now, we have also seen another nice little side effect from all of this raw information being provided to the public, in the fact that it can hasten the process of convicting somebody. So if we have a certain bit of information being released that indicates that, hey, this particular person was responsible for ordering the torture of these particular people. Okay, we've actually been able to use that information to garner enough evidence in a court of justice to bring that person to justice. That's cool. Very cool. So it can accelerate the process of discovering and presenting evidence to the courts by providing certain tidbits about the document that give the lawyers the information that they need and the attorneys the information they need to be able to pull up that information and prosecute or defend appropriately. And that's pretty cool. Be like, hey, seems that on page 29 of this list of his emails, it seems that he was pretty incriminating. And so look at that. They will bring that up in court and prosecute. But it's not that they're using WikiLeaks as a direct source. It's just WikiLeaks is at least providing the information that the prosecutors can use to go in and actually find the source themselves. But once again, when they do that, when the prosecutors or defenders in a court case do that, defense attorneys can find the places in those documents and verify them. And they, every time so far, have been exactly what WikiLeaks has provided. Which is pretty surprising. Pretty surprising. Now we get to the fun part. Alright. I know really I was kind of talking about this from a political perspective, trying to throw WikiLeaks into this whole situation. Because really, from what I've been saying, WikiLeaks seems to be pretty legit. even though certain other sources may try to sit here and say that we need to be focusing on the founder of WikiLeaks. Okay, when he founded it in 2007, he's been confined, so to speak, basically being kept in an embassy owned by the UK for the past few years because he was brought up on rape charges. That's unfortunate. That's really unfortunate. And if you go to the website on WikiLeaks and try to look up this information, they try to play it off like a conspiracy theory that everybody's just trying to get a reason to convict him of some sort of thing. And that's unfortunate. I don't know about that. That's an entirely different can of worms that we are not going to go on to here. Aside from talking about the founder, we can sit here and talk about some of the things that they've been leaking, that WikiLeaks has been leaking regarding Hillary Clinton and emails. Now, obviously, the first thing that we leap into with the emails is the fact that her emails were on a server, on a private server, and those emails were lost. About 33,000, I think, was the last number I saw, and they were lost. They were deleted permanently in some way and are gone. Obviously, during the debates, Trump felt it necessary to bring that up on a number of occasions, as it is one of the main complaints about Hillary Clinton. I'm not going to focus too much on how the debates relate to this. What I will focus on is one person in particular, the campaign chairman for Hillary Clinton. His name is John Podesta. A number of his emails were leaked through WikiLeaks, and there's some interesting things in there. Okay, so Podesta's somebody who's been familiar with the Clintons for a while. He was actually Bill Clinton's chief of staff from 1998 to 2001, while Clinton was president. And in this particular leak, in part one of the leak, so to speak, there are over 2,000 emails and about 170 attachments to those emails. And they were analyzed and posted on WikiLeaks here. And people are trying to go through them and piece through them and put together a scenario that fits in line with what they're thinking. Right? And what they're thinking is that Hillary Clinton is into some shady stuff. That she's doing some very not so kind back alley transactions with Russia, with the Middle East, and that she's basically out to rape and pillage the American people and try to gain as much money and power as she can along the way. And so that's really kind of the context and perspective that a number of people are coming at these emails from. And so they're trying to look at these emails and take apart anything that they can use to further those goals. Let me just note as an aside, whenever you start going into a situation with a preconceived notion or a preconceived hypothesis or theory or whatever, you're actually kind of jeopardizing your own results because you're kind of introducing bias. So you have to be careful doing that. And as I'll mention later, I'm not sure that WikiLeaks is being very careful while doing this. So we'll come back to that. Anyway, the real part about these Podesta emails is that in this particular leak, he was trying to talk about the acquisition of Uranium-1 by Russia. Uranium-1 is kind of this company that produced a lot of uranium here in the U.S. In fact, it was about 20% of the uranium in the U.S. Was being produced by this one particular company. And the U.S. was basically negotiating a way that Russia could buy this company so that they can sell the uranium that this company produces. And this all happened about 2009, 2013. That's when this company was gradually kind of shifted into the hands of Russia over a series of payments and over a series of time. But this whole decision was mediated by this agency, this committee, I should say. This Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., or CFIUS. This organization was comprised of 9 different agencies in the US, but was headed up by the Treasury Department. Okay, kind of makes sense since we're talking about foreign investment that the Treasury Department would be interested in heading up this initiative. But if we look at all the other different agencies and departments, we see the Defense Department, we see the Department of Homeland Security, neither of which had a problem with this deal, by the way. Okay, they didn't have a problem with Russia having a stake in the United States in the form of this uranium company. Otherwise, they would have said something. Okay, and at no point did they object to this maneuver to sell this company to Russia. But we can also see some other departments being thrown into the mix. We have the Department of Commerce, Energy, the Attorney General, the U.S. Trade Representative, the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and of course the State Department. In which case, at that particular time period, Hillary Clinton was a Secretary of State. And that's what started making people wonder about this situation. They're like, well, so what did she have to do with this whole transaction? Because the cool thing seems to be lately to incriminate people to have some sort of ties with Russia. Because all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we're back to caring about Russia and they're our enemy and whatever. We'll get to more about that later. But for now, we can consider these people being very suspicious that Clinton was somehow involved with this transfer of this company to Russia. But the truth of the matter is that when it came to this particular unit, this CFIUS, Clinton actually wasn't directly connected with that at all. In fact, the representative of the State Department in this particular matter was Jose Fernandez. And Jose Fernandez at no point directly consulted Clinton for any of these deals that he was doing. He was basically on his own, handling the State Department as their representative at this particular committee. He wasn't going back and talking to Clinton all the time. He didn't even mention this stuff to her. He just did his job every day. Okay? And this was confirmed by him. That, hey, I didn't have anything to do with that, The complication came when later on, many years later on, I think it was 2015 when we were looking at some emails here that showed Jose Fernandez contacting Clinton and some of her advisors and saying, hey, I would love to do whatever I can to support the Hillary Clinton campaign. So I would love to hear your advice and volunteer to help you in running the campaign. Because I believe that I can be some assistance. He was basically putting forth his resume in that email. He's saying, hey, I've done all this stuff. I am awesome in these ways. If you need me or want me for this campaign, dude, call me up. It was literally him putting himself out there. Other people took this as meaning that Jose Fernandez was always really close to the Clintons and has always been keeping tabs on them and sucking up to them and working with them very intimately for the entire time period. But that wasn't the case. I mean, he worked with them, but he wasn't intimately involved with them, so to speak. Okay, so it really bothers me that some people are trying to make that kind of assertion when there's no evidence to support it. Emails only support this guy reaching out to Clinton, seeing that she's running for president and being like, hey, you want somebody to help you along? I have these qualifications, dude. Hit me up. They see another email here that says, I would like to do all I can to support Hillary Clinton. And some people took that as meaning, well, that was him agreeing to lie that he didn't have anything to do with Clinton during this time period, 2009, 2013, when this Russian deal was going down. That was him agreeing to lie for that in exchange for, getting certain benefits from the Clintons during this particular presidential campaign. That's crazy to me. That's really reaching. Because at no point in the emails does it cite any sort of specifics along those lines. This seems legitimately like somebody who is wanting to help, who likes the Clintons, believes in what they're doing, has a lot of experience in the field, and is just putting forth his resume and saying, hey, you want me to be on the team? I would love to be. Now, one of the legitimately shady, I guess you could say, transactions in this whole bit was that during the time period in which Russia was trying to acquire this uranium-1 from the U.S., there were a series of 4 different donations to the Clinton Foundation from the chairman of Uranium-1, Ian Telfer. And those donations totaled $2.35 million. So, not exactly a drop in the bucket. That's actually a substantial amount of money that we're talking about. So that starts to point you in the other direction. Be like, well, I wonder if Clinton had anything to do directly with this whole situation or not. Because this is kind of leading me to believe, well, maybe she did. Maybe she did have something to do with this acquisition of uranium-1 by Russia. I don't know. That's interesting. And this was definitely something that was mentioned in a certain book that came out last year called Clinton Cash. I think it was last year. It's by Peter Schweizer. And he was actually a member of the Hoover Institute. He was a staunch conservative. And so it's no surprising that he published this book kind of indicating that, well, some of the Clinton Foundation money appears to be a little shady. Appears to be somewhat related to some of these things that she was doing and a part of while she was employed by the American government. But if you really start looking at it, you start seeing that, well, that's not necessarily true. Okay, because if we look at one of the things that people have, some people have mentioned as far as Hillary Clinton getting money donated to the Clinton Foundation from Saudi Arabia, we actually don't see that happening during her tenure as Secretary of State. Once she became Secretary of State in 2009, she no longer got any donations from Saudi Arabia. She got it before she was Secretary of State, and she got it after she was Secretary of State, but she never got it during. So that, to me, doesn't necessarily say anything about corruption or Saudi Arabia having any say in the types of decisions that she was making while she was a representative of our country. So honestly, I think that kind of clears her on that respect. Now, if we think about the Clinton Foundation, and we think about the types of things that they've done as far as reporting who their donors are and what the amounts that they've gotten from said donors like Saudi Arabia, we realize that there's really no obligation for them to do that. Okay? Clinton Foundation doesn't have to do that at all. And that stems from the fact that nonprofits don't have to do that, really at all. They may report it to the government, but they don't necessarily have to report it publicly. Clinton Foundation does. They do that. They may not sit there and itemize every single thing, but they certainly give you a very broad idea of where they get their donations and how much those donations are, which is far above and beyond most nonprofit organizations. So if we try to look at exactly what's happened with the whole Clinton email scandal situation, those 33,000 emails that randomly disappeared, once again, they were on a private server, and it was done in a way that was actually kind of similar to an old Secretary of State, Colin Powell. Right? Colin Powell also used a private email while he was in office. Once again, not the most ideal thing, not the best thing at all, but he did do it. Okay. The only difference here in this particular case is that not only did Clinton use a private email, she also used a private server. And that's what kind of differentiates her from anyone else before her. Nobody has done that. And so the situation overall is very, very unique, very strange. She claims that it was out of convenience, so she only needed one phone at a time instead of two different phones. You know, one for private, one for her job as Secretary of State. But when we start looking into that situation, we see that there's a certain aide of Clinton's. His name was Justin Cooper. And he was actually the one who bought and set up this private server for emails. And for some reason, it's very bizarre, he ended up smashing 2 out of her 13 BlackBerry phones with a hammer in an effort to destroy the data within them. Really bizarre. Also, marginally effective unless you are really good with that hammer, because you have to hit the exact hard drive and crush that thing into microscopic bits and to really destroy the data. Otherwise, it's salvageable. Not entirely sure if he did that, but the thing is that if you want to sit here and claim, well, Hillary was into some really shady stuff because one of her aides went off and hammered 2 of her phones. Like, okay, I can understand that. That is shady. I agree. But was he doing that under orders? That's question 1. Question 2 is, why weren't the other 11 phones crushed by a hammer? And then if we look at what happened to the server itself and the hard drive on that server, that was actually cleaned with a certain software utility called BleachBit, which goes on there and tries to erase permanently any and all information on that particular hard drive. So between the mechanical devastation of 2 of the phones and more software means like BleachBit to cleanse everything else, that's how we're in this situation where those 33,000 emails are just gone, for the most part. And yet we have some of these emails from Podesta that are somewhat incriminatory, right? So we can kind of look at how this relates to the actual situation here in this political landscape and start looking at how this violates our own laws, right? Because this is kind of shady. It is. But we're seeing the FBI director himself sit here and say, well, we didn't find clear evidence that Clinton or her colleagues intended to violate laws governing the handling of classified information. But we did see evidence that they were extremely careless in handling highly classified information. So FBI director said, well, what they did was bad. It was careless, borderline stupid. But you know what? We really can't find enough reason to charge them with anything. And that was the FBI director saying that. So I'm okay with that. I'm confident with that. I'm all right. So guess we'll just have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for stopping by this week on Based on Facts. If you'd like to find us on Facebook or YouTube, find us just by searching for us in the search bar, Based on Facts. So my name is Chris Rex. Thank you again for joining me, and have a great one.